Good morning. Thank you, Robin, for that warm introduction. And FCCI conference is one of my favorite conferences of the year, and just so honored to be able to share here today. I'm going to be sharing a very personal journey that started when I was 32 years of age. That was 5 years ago, by the way. That was 33 years ago when I was 32 years. But I'm going to share it. It's a messy story, but boy, it has one of those God's endings that only God could do, with many miracles in this story. But I'm going to share this personal journey. I grew up like a lot of you, just normal childhood. Grew up north of Cincinnati, near where Kings Island is located. That my 89-year-old mom, still lives there today. We see her every weekend, and just a wonderful childhood. And really, at that point in my life, I had the right moral compass and doing the right things in my life. I was a gifted student. I was in the physics club. I ran track. I was senior class president of my high school class. I met my wife Ginger when she was in 7th grade and I was in 8th grade. When we first met in the school band, we went to our high school proms together. And I know this sounds like, boy, this is a marriage in childhood, but I can tell you, when I'm finished with this story, it's a miracle that our marriage survived what it survived. And I don't take it lightly that I'm married 43 years to a wonderful woman, when I gave her every reason to run when I was in my early 30s. And as Robin said, I was the only child out of 4 to go to college. Got my bachelor's and master's at Ohio State University, PhD in biochemistry at Cornell, full scholarship for 8 years. And my mom said I went and got a college degree for all of them, for the whole family. But somewhere along the path, when I was 32 years of age and I became a divisional president of one of the largest companies in the world, number 56 on the Fortune 500, $70 billion in revenue, 30,000 employees. We had a 75-year-old CEO, had a 69-year-old president. I was divisional president of the company and corporate vice president of the whole company, and 32 years of age. And somewhere along I lost my way. I mean, this is an example of selfish leadership, not servant leadership, that I'm about ready to share. And I lost my moral compass during that journey. And after a couple years there, the company seen me as part of the family. I remember the vice chairman brought me back to his office and gave me a $100,000 bonus and 25,000 shares of stock. That was about $1 million at that point. And I was with the company for about 8 years, and with bonuses earned 7 figures every year for 8 years. And that was in 1989. You're talking 33 years ago. And I remember he gave that to me, and it was kind of an unusual time. It wasn't a time we normally get our performance bonuses. And he came back about an hour later, then I knew what it was for. He said, "Mark, you're a couple years with us now, and we now see you part of the family. We're going to share with you about a price fixing that we've been doing, and we've been doing it for about 12 years. And we have an international cartel working with our competitors. And now that the CEO is 75 years old and the president is 69 years old, we need you to learn this process, and eventually you're going to take this over, this international cartel that's been going on for 12 years. And I remember quickly saying, well, that's not legal. And the vice chairman quickly said, "Mark, everybody does it. This is what people do in the commodity business. If you're in the business of corn and soy and high fructose corn syrup and lysine and food additives and feed additives that get used around the world, one of the largest food additive companies in the world, the politicians," he said, "that put these antitrust laws on the books didn't know anything about business. And this is the way business is done, and this is what we do, and you'll be good at it." And, this is about an hour after he just gave me $1 million between the stock and in the bonus, and I was hook, line, and sinker at that point. I got obsessed with that lifestyle. When I joined the company, the 7 top executives each had their own jet. So I had access to the Falcon 50s, the jets during that time, the 8 years I was there. I bought the CEO's home. He gave me a huge startup bonus to buy his home. I bought that the first month in October of '89 when I started working at Archer Daniels Midland, a 13,000 square foot house, 8-car garage, horse riding stables where your kids ride, and inside an arena. And it's okay to have a nice house and a nice car, and I filled that 8-car garage with 8 cars. But I tell you, I became obsessed with that. Eventually, that's what I was working for. I was working for that materialism and the compensation, and I was working for all the wrong things during that time in my life. I basically lost my moral compass during that period of my life. Even though my childhood, I had the right moral compass, I lost it when I got to the level of power and greed. And so while I was getting obsessed with materialism and success and power and being the number 4 executive in the 56th largest company in America, Ginger was getting obsessed with Jesus. She was joined the women's Bible study groups, and she was going to church, and I was going to church with her, but it was one ear and out the other. And thank God that my 3 children took more after Ginger than they did me, because they're all 3 walking with the Lord today, and I give Ginger full credit for that. And I was happy that Ginger was obsessed with that, because that allowed me to work from morning to night. 90% of my income was in bonuses and stock options, so the more I worked, the more I earned. So the busier Ginger was, that's the busier I could be to get the performance, to get the $2 or $3 million a year that I was always trying to get, that was in my employment contract, if I met certain performance parameters. But I remember, so I'm starting to take over the price fixing. I'm starting to be mentored to take that over. This would have been 1992. And I remember Ginger set me down one day. It was November 5th. And she said, "Mark, something's going on in your life. Something's changed. And something this last 7 months," she said, "I've known you since you were in the 8th grade. And something's changed these last few months." And I said, "Well, Ginger, the leadership, there's only 3 leaders above me out of the 30,000 employees. They're equipping me to eventually take over a cartel, an international cartel, a price fixing scheme that fixes the prices and ingredients that go into all your foods and beverages that you buy in the grocery store." And she said, "Mark, is that legal?" And I said, "Well, it's not legal, but Ginger, everybody does it. This is what they do in the commodity business, and they tell me you can't do business without doing this, and this is the way it is. If I'm going to continue to move up the corporate ladder, this is what I got to do." And I remember her saying this. I remember she said, "Mark, that sounds like fraud to me." And I said, "Well, legally, I guess from the government perspective, it would be a fraud, but they tell me this is what everybody has to do, and everybody does it. All of our competitors that we're working with, we're sitting down with them and fixing the prices." And she said, "Well, who pays this extra $1 billion a year the company earns? Not $1 million, but $1 billion a year." And I said, "Basically, consumers pay it. When they go to the grocery store, they're paying for this. When they buy a breakfast cereal or a beverage or a food or any processed food, would be difficult to find that doesn't have some ingredient from ADM in it." And she said, "You mean my grandma is paying for this and she's on $200 a week Social Security, and that's her biggest bill, is her grocery bill?" She said, "Mark, I don't know if I can live with this." And so she said she was going to go back in her study and pray about it, and we talk about it later. When she told me she was going to pray about it, I knew I was in trouble right then when she told me that. She went back in her study for a couple hours and prayed about it, and she came down and she said, "Mark, God led her to a decision." And I'm thinking, good, I got to get to my next price fixing meeting. A lot of our competitors were international, so 8 o'clock at night in Decatur, Illinois was 8 o'clock in the morning in Southeast Asia, because a lot of our competition was in Southeast Asia, Ajinomoto and Kiwahako and some of the ones that make some of the food and feed additives. And she said, no, Mark, you're not going to be going to a meeting." She said, I've made a decision. God's led me a decision to turn you into the FBI. I said, "Ginger, I could go to prison for breaking antitrust laws. I said, the CEO of ADM is best friends with President Clinton. He went to President Nixon's funeral on President Clinton's plane. They talk once or twice a month with the President of the United States. This is a billionaire. This man in this company will destroy us. And she said, you know what, Mark? She said, my CEO is bigger than your CEO. My CEO is Jesus, and God's going to protect us. But you're going to turn yourself in. You're going to do it today. And if you go to prison, I'll stay with you. And I tried to talk her out of it for a couple hours. I've known Ginger since she was in 7th grade, and I know there was no way out of it. And within the day that I shared with Ginger, a case that was going on for 12 years, the largest price-fixing case in U.S. history, was started by my wife, Ginger. And we're sitting with the FBI for 4 hours. We're sitting with the FBI for 4 hours. I don't know how many of your spouses have turned you into the FBI, but it's an interesting experience, and I don't recommend it. So we're sitting with the FBI for 4 hours, Ginger's sharing the truth of what I shared with her a couple hours before. And I had a choice to either be arrested or wear a wire against the kingpins that were training me how to do that case. And I decided it'd be more interested probably to wear a wire than be arrested that day. So I met the FBI agents at 6 o'clock the next morning. They told me it'd only be about 6 weeks. They shaved my chest. They hooked microphones to my chest. I met those FBI agents at 6 o'clock every morning, Monday through Friday, for 3 years. It wasn't 6 weeks. It was from 1992 to 1995. And I wore a wire 8, 9, 10 hours a day for 3 years. Lost 60 pounds because they would wire me up and say, Mark, if these guys catch you, somebody could kill you. This is serious stuff. And if they catch you wearing a wire, they could kill you. And most pressure I've ever had in my entire life. At the end of wearing that wire for 3 years, the FBI gave me a deal of a lifetime, 6 months, a Martha Stewart sentence in a white-collar camp, no fence, 6 months in federal prison. My lawyer called me in Chicago, Ginger by my side as she always was. He said, Mark, 6 months in prison. You got 48 hours to sign this. I looked at Ginger and I said, Ginger, I don't know if I could do 6 months. And Ginger said, sign it, Mark. I beg you to sign it. And I looked at Ginger and I said, Ginger, you're the reason I'm in this mess in the first place. I had to wear a wire 3 years because of you, to Ginger I said. I ripped up that plea agreement in her face, fired the lawyer on the spot, hired several lawyers the next day, and fought the case for 3 years in the courts to get an 8.5-year sentence instead. Boy, I showed Ginger, didn't I? And I would have had a 6-month plea agreement. 6 months. I was so depressed knowing I had 8.5 years in prison to do, and all the mistakes that I made. And I thought my family was better without me than with me. And I pulled my car in the garage, and I tried to take my own life. I tried to kill myself. Wrote a 17-page letter to Ginger and my kids, and I absolutely wanted to die. I couldn't imagine 8.5 years in federal prison and all the destruction. I've already calls from my family at that point. I was hopeless and helpless. Well, 2 individuals read about that in the newspaper. One of them, his name was Ian Howells, the CFO of a pharmaceutical company. He was part of a group called CBMC, and he reached out to me, and he said, Mark, prison is going to be the beginning of your life, and you're going to find your true purpose in life with the journey you're ready to start. It sounded like the strangest thing I ever heard before you go 8.5 years of federal prison. And he started introducing me to God and introduced me to Jesus. And then the second week in prison, Chuck Colson showed up. About 7 months later, and Chuck Colson showed up and started discipling and pouring his life into me, became like a father to me. He went to prison. You probably know of him in the Watergate scandal years earlier. He was White House counsel for President Nixon and went to federal prison. And he started pouring into my life. And one of the blocks that I had was I had 8 years of college that saying God did not exist. I had professors at Ohio State and Cornell said, if you believe in God, you can't be in my class. If you believe in God, you can't be a PhD scientist. So I thought, who do I believe, them or my parents who didn't go to college? So I really had 8 years of hearing nothing but there is no God. And Chuck Colson helped me break that science block. He asked me, he said, Mark, do you think there's a PhD scientist that believes in God? And I said, no, I don't think there's any. And he started introducing me in article after article and book after book, some of the best scientists in the world, that believe in God, but the university just never talked about it. Even Albert Einstein said only God could create the universe and only God could create man. And I sure never heard that about Albert Einstein when I was at Cornell getting my PhD. And Sir Isaac Newton wrote as much about Jesus as he did about science. And I never heard any of those things in the university during that time. So I became a Christian my first year in prison. I was $20 a month for 8 years after earning $2 to $3 million for 8 years. And they became the most productive years in my life. I hope guys get their GEDs, learn how to read, and some of them spoke only Spanish, and I learned how to speak English and write English, and they become some of the most productive years of my life. For the first time in my life, I was helping somebody else besides myself, because I'd never helped anybody else prior to going to prison. And I learned how rewarding it was to serve God and to be a servant leader. And Ginger and I look back today, and if I would have accepted that 6-month sentence, we don't even think I would have listened to a Chuck Colson or an Ian House. We thank God today. She said murder was on the table, and even though divorce wasn't, murder was an option during that time when I ripped up that 6-month sentence. But looking back, we both thank God that we didn't sign that 6-month sentence, that God gave me exactly what I needed, which was 8 years in federal prison. And Ginger and I are going to be sharing this on stage tomorrow at 2 o'clock, breaking it down. You'll be getting her perspective too, but we're going to go in a lot more detail tomorrow on this story, where she share what was on her mind at the time when she turned me into the FBI on the largest price-fixing case in U.S. history. Well, I've been out a couple decades now, and I do want to say this, that Ginger, God gave me Ginger as the only reason why I stand here today. Actually, Ginger is all the reasons that I stand here today. Ginger, God bless me tremendously with Ginger, with a wife and kids that love me after all the things that I put them through, which was a living hell during that time. And I've been out a couple decades, and I've been heavily involved with the Faith at Work movement. And today I work for the last several years, T Factor, which for Coca-Cola Consolidated, T stands for transformation. And what is the purpose of T Factor? Where it's to transform workplace cultures around the world for good and for God and for growth.